Hi, everybody. This is Jonathan Burke with AOGP Outside of the Church podcast. This is episode 8 of season 5. This one is going to be on an interesting topic we call valences. I'm here with Jason Robba, and we're going to have an interesting podcast on why people act like somebody else instead of themselves. Basically, that's what a valence is. And you've probably seen yourself do this. So you ready to get started, Jason?
Yeah, I like this. I like this topic quite a bit. I think it's a good jumping off point from where we were yesterday, talking about Dianetics and PTSD and what Dianetics and Scientology can do for you. So this is a real great topic here that I know a lot of you will find interest in.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and it's one of those things that, well, you've got objective and you've got subjective as two different realities. Objective is things that you can see, objects. Subjective is something that, if I say, think of a black cat, that's subjective because it's about a subject and you're thinking about it in your mind and your mind's eye. So valences are both objective and subjective. So let's get started on this. And you want to fire off some questions, and then we will kind of just see where the ball takes us.
Yeah. Okay. So just so everybody knows, so what is a valence? I know it's a term within electronics as well, and I think that's where Hubbard originally got it from, was with particle
and chemistry
and chemistry.
Yeah, and chemistry too. So a valence is a solution to a problem.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, let's say if you're in an abusive environment, you've heard the expression, if you can't beat them, join them, right?
Right.
So if you can't beat them, join them means if you're in an environment, an abusive environment, and, abusive is a horse of many colors, but suppressive environment and or abusive, physically, verbally, whatever, you're under suppression. Now, this gets into our potential trouble source in suppressive person territory as well. So we'll dispatch this and get it out of the way real quick too. The interesting thing about a valence is that what happens is in these suppressive environments, abusive environments, a person will take on the valence of their suppressor. You've heard of Stockholm syndrome, right?
Right.
Well, this is a lighter hair, red-haired second cousin of that.
Yeah.
Because a person will take on a valence for two reasons. The first reason is they will take a valence on because the second greatest particle in the physical universe and in the spiritual theta universe, it's attention, right below admiration. So you've seen little kids who act out, right? Mm-hmm. And they behave badly because it gets attention. Mm-hmm. And whether it's good attention or bad attention, it's still attention. There is no right or left to attention. So what will happen is that a person will take on the valence that gets the most attention. So if you're in a household with mother and father and a couple brothers and a couple sisters, you're going to take on the valence that gets the most attention of the people that is around you. And the interesting thing is that valence that you're taking on is the valence that has been taken on by one of your brothers or sisters or your mother or father. So you see in the psychological and psychiatric lines where they're always talking Freudian, mama and papa, and all of this. Well, there's a lineage to this, and it's and this is an interesting line, and you see this on the upper levels in Scientology as well, and the newer Dianetics for OTs. Is you've got a heritage line or a lineage of this valence. And this valence, it might not be just familial lineage, but it is a lineage of people that could probably date back thousands of years. And it's sort of like jumps from one person to another in a family line, and then jumps over to another family, like maybe somebody was a foster kid, or maybe they were living with friends of the family, or there was a car accident and the mom and the dad were killed or something like that. So it jumps and it crosses over this particular solution to a problem. So you have this valence. It's a package of behaviors and now I'm supposed to's based off of the simple principle of attention. And if you get attention, typically attention equals survival. So this is why people take these on. Mm-hmm. And why they do the strange things that they do. So how this enters into auditing is if a person is out of valence, okay, they're not themselves, because there's no such thing as a person being in their own valence. They're just being themselves. Mm-hmm. Typically, most people at some point in time, especially if they're under duress, like we were talking about in the podcast about how to introduce Scientology to people in new ways, if they're seeing an incident through their own eyes, they're out of valence. They're not being themselves. And we know this because when they are themselves, they see themselves 3 feet back of their head or off to the side of the body, 3 to 5 feet away.
Right.
So it's a solution to a problem. Yeah. That's what a valence is.
Right. And then there's a number of ways that these valences get picked up, right? They can be when someone is overwhelmed by that valence, or it can be installed within an engram, or there are a number of different ways, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, typically it's with duress or trauma or PTSD, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing. It's just a different label of it. But it's when it's put in there as a traumatic incident when it really sticks.
Yeah.
It's really sticky. And, you have to survive. And, the valence, whenever you see like, for example, I'll just give you a really simple example. What does a dog that gets beat do after it's been beat enough and it thinks you're going to beat it and you're not the one that was assaulting the dog? It yelps.
Right. And then it becomes,
yeah. And then it, please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. Well, that's a valence.
Or it can also become the one beating it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's dramatizing the one beating and eventually the person stopped beating them because the dog's alive and it's still there. I mean, I'm not trying to be coarse in saying that, but it survived.
Yeah.
That's the key. It survived. And this is a rough universe where, only the tough ones survive. And that's where you get that nice guys finish last sort of thing. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. And we're going to talk about the distasteful topic for people that have been in the Church of Scientology. And it isn't a distasteful topic, but it's distasteful because they've been abused. Mm-hmm. They've been abused on it with ethics, and that is ethics. Mm-hmm. Here's the interesting thing, the valences. When a person is doing something unethical, they're out of valence. Yeah. Think about that. Mm-hmm. They're out of valence because a being is basically good. Right. Hubbard says. Mm-hmm. I've found this to be true as an auditor. Great. And if somebody is doing something that is unethical towards themselves or their wife or their children or their family or their group at work, their church, they are not being themselves. It is a solution to a problem in that valence package of things. Mm-hmm. And the reason that Hubbard developed the Scientology ethics conditions, there's those lower end conditions called enemy and treason.
Yeah.
for this very reason. Find out that you are and find out who you are. Now that's a toughie when somebody's out of valence.
Yeah.
I mean, that's doing one the hard way, because there's no auditor there or anything like that. And this is the thing about a valence, is if the person could front up and confront the fact that they were being somebody else, likelihood is they wouldn't be that valence in the first place.
Right.
So being unethical is a solution to a problem, which is the same definition as a valence. They are one and the same. So this is a really interesting position for an auditor, because when we look at our personality tests that we have people do, you're looking at A to J traits. You're looking at a particular valence.
Mm-hmm.
And if the D column on this personality test is below plus 32, you're looking at a person who is suppressed and is a potential trouble source. And the whole graph goes out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are being somebody else so much to the degree that they will not be able to be trained or processed, because you're training and processing somebody else. And for lack of a better way to put it, they're not there enough to do something for.
Yeah, so I want to interject a question in here while we're still near to this topic. You're clearing up a concept for me that I think I may have misunderstood or not had all the data on. When I first read Dianetics, Modern Science, and Mental Health, I grasped the concept of a valence being a copy of another personality. So Papa's valence, Mama's valence. And then I've been exposed to concepts of being something, being an object, or being a terminal, being a Marine as a valence, or being something as a valence. And then when you mentioned a solution to a problem, that would imply that a valence can be manufactured. It doesn't necessarily have to be a copy of the winning valence in a fight, for instance. Like if someone got beat up by their spouse, they could end up like you were talking about with Stockholm syndrome. They can end up taking on the valence of the dominant personality there. But when it's a solution to a problem, it sounds like it could also be a valence that's manufactured, that's not a copy of an actual person. It's just the thing that allows them to survive. Like you're talking about the dog that gets beat, it learns to react and respond a certain way so that it won't get beat.
Yeah. Well, it's a synthetic valence. It's still a series of now I'm supposed to's, but I've got to be the baddest of the bad gang members in prison in order to survive, and I have to be the baddest of the bad. Mm-hmm. And that could be a synthetic valence, whatever that entails. If it's beating people within an inch of their lives and taking an eye and, shivving them, with a made up pointy device that gets them to bleed out or whatever, or I have to kill so many people because it's just in prison in that sort of a thing, that sort of a place, it's survival of the fittest. Mm-hmm. Survival of the meanest. So they can develop these things, and maybe they've seen somebody else. I mean, it's just like anything else. If they get a wide enough cross sample, they get an idea, and they'll pull from this and they'll pull from that, just like an actor would in a movie.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Pull it in. So yeah. But so being a victim is also a valence. Then, if someone has something occur to them, is abused by a parent or abused by a spouse or abused by a friend or something, abused by anyone, they can turn on a valence which gets that abuse to stop. So well, and that's the whole thing, and that's the interesting thing. That's why Dianetics works. Because Dianetics works because anybody, per Hubbard, can be a victim. Yeah. And that's why it was so wildly successful, as everybody was like, well, I've been a villain. I've been a victim. Yeah, anybody can be a victim. Sure. Yeah, I get it. That makes sense. And that was why it was so overwhelmingly popular,
is because it was a point of reality at the lower end of the tone scale, the chart of attitudes, that, and I mean, you look at where victim is on the tone scale and you go, wow, that's really way down there. Yeah. Well, it's a catch-all net that everybody can agree upon, that they've all been a victim at some point in time. And if you enter in from that entry point, well, you can pretty much catch all the fish in the sea now, can't you?
Yeah. So that just makes sense then why in today's society, why it seems like the victim is the greatest worshipped archetype on social media and within media now, because it's like you said about, or like, with attention and being a very valuable commodity in this universe, so people get attention for being a victim.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what separates out what we were talking about a couple podcasts ago about Homo sapiens and Homo novus.
Yeah,
is Homo novus a clear looks at it and goes, okay, I was being there and I was communicating.
Yeah.
Homo sapiens goes, it's not my fault. Mm-hmm. I was just minding my own business when the car crashed into the cafe from the street, sort of a thing. Yep. And, I mean, by most people's standards, they would think, when somebody said, no, you were there.
Right.
Because you're looking at a really, really, really low level of perception on this planet. We've talked about this ad nauseum in podcasts lately, but it bears mentioning again that on this planet, you're dealing with an incredibly slow moving process of things. You're dealing with a slow, low awareness and an extremely slow level of responsibility. And it's all being looked at through the lenses of being in the physical universe only. Mm. This is the important factor, is that when a person is being a victim, they're looking at everything in their ability through the lens of the physical universe. All right. Now let that sink in for a moment, listeners. That is a slippery eel. Mm-hmm. Because if you aren't aware of all of the goings on, which is what Hubbard found out, and which is the difference between Homo sapiens and Homo novus, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
You're not aware of the fact that the visible spectrum that the body can see in is an incredibly narrow crack between a door and a door jamb. Mm-hmm. The door is not wide open. The window is barely open a crack, and you're only seeing this tiny, tiny field of a spectrum with the human eye. You're mm-hmm. only hearing it with the human ear, and you would know this better than I would, having gone to school for it, but the human ear doesn't hear a very wide spectrum. Look at what dogs can hear.
Right. Yep. We can only hear between 20 cycles per second and 20,000 cycles per second.
Yeah, and that's not much. And we can only feel, the body can only feel in a limited spectrum as well. I mean, the electromagnetic spectrum is incredibly wide, and that's just in the physical universe. That's just the spectrum that we are aware of. Mm-hmm. So my point being is, if you're not even aware of the fact that you can make decisions and they can actually play out, and I'm really dumbing this down here, but we have this thing called postulates in Scientology and Dianetics. And a postulate is a decision about something. You've said, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a lawyer. That's a postulate. Now, if you make a postulate to be a lawyer, you make a postulate to go to the store and get groceries. You make a postulate to brush your teeth. You make a postulate to change your underwear and do your laundry. Well, these are all postulates. You're putting something out in the future, but there's doing this that takes place. Now, this is the thing that people miss, and this has everything to do with valences as well. We'll get back to that in here just a second. But when you decide to go to the cafe that day and the car comes careening in off of the street into all of the tables at the cafe, who made that postulate?
Person sitting in the cafe.
That's right. That's right. Now, that's something to front up. That's hard to front up to. Okay. Responsibility is a bitch. Right. But the fact of the matter is we make these postulates. And it's not just the postulate to go to the cafe, but you find that when you audit a person and they're in valence, that they take responsibility for these things. And they look at, I was putting in my ethics when that happened because I was really doing some horrible stuff at the time. One for one situation that I've dealt with, and other people have dealt with myself, have always found that this is how this thing rolls. And this is what LRH was talking about, that when your ethics are out, you're being somebody else. And you're going to put your ethics in. Why do you put your ethics in? Why do you are the captain of your fate, the master of your soul. Mm-hmm. You put your own ethics in to right things and to put yourself back in your valence.
So in modern times, we have this interesting thing that is clinically called dissociative identity disorder, which I would say is the extreme version of when there are multiple valences going around. And it sounds like probably where there's no responsibility taken for those breaks between the different personalities. So like the movie, I think it's called Broken. That wasn't me, that was Patricia, that movie, where it seems like, at that point, no responsibility being taken for the actions of the valence of Patricia. Someone
you see that all the time, where how does a person evade responsibility? I mean, this is pretty a concatenation of things, but I mean, you see it more and more and more and more as society starts to go down the chute, that the solution to the problem is just to become somebody else.
Yeah. And usually there is something, there's an engram, there's a heavy incident there that causes that, to use their term again, that split, that fragment, that taking the hard drive and putting a partition and installing a different operating system there. Mm-hmm. I've got this, I've got Windows installed on the other side of it.
Right. No. Right. Yeah. And like Hubbard says, valences are calculated to do something. Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at this and you go, now, wait a minute, when you're calculating to do something, doesn't that mean you're doing it on purpose? And what are the ramifications of that? What's the difference between somebody doing something they don't know it and doing something when they do know it?
So that's what the dead and the dead X versus an overt.
Well, it is, but that's probably a little too. It would take some time to describe and all of that for our listeners. But the concepts of dead and dead X predate. They're very early in Dianetics and Scientology, and you're not wrong on what you're saying. That's a can of worms. We probably ought to stay away from, because it's a lot to get into in one podcast. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing is that if somebody is out of valence, like you were talking about, where maybe they have multiple personalities. Okay. So that would be sort of like you have 5 paintbrushes that paint 5 colors, and you're trying to paint a picture. And you're trying to paint a picture of something completely different than what's really going on, and you're doing it on purpose. Now, I'm not saying that all people have multiple personality disorder are doing this, but I am saying that it is a solution to a problem that they cannot resolve.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is doing it on purpose. But my question is that if a person knows that they're doing this and a valence is calculated to do something across the boards, well, that's part of the reason why a person is unethical and does unethical things when they're out of valence, is because it's unethical to be using some other valence as a solution to a problem instead of confronting your life as yourself. This is pretty meaty for a podcast. There's going to be a lot of people that listen to this and go, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah. So the old one of when we have a couple beers before we go on stage, to play the show, that whole thing of having a drink to lower inhibitions and everything, like you said before on one of the Andy Nolch podcasts, like alcohol, LRH saying alcohol's a forgetter. So responsibility out the window. Now I can do that one thing because I've had a few drinks in me. I can go play my drums a little bit better now and go hit on that girl afterwards because, I've had a few drinks in me. But, sober me, wouldn't do that. But me with 3 beers in me, it's a different story. Same me.
Right.
Valence.
Right. Well, my mom, when she was alive, when she used to laugh and she used to get really tickled about something, she would immediately turn on multiple coughs. And she couldn't enjoy herself and would start coughing. She got this from my grandmother, her mother. This is a valence.
Yeah.
I can't enjoy myself. Now, the reason why I bring this up right in the middle of this is somebody like John Bonham from Led Zeppelin was, a teetotaler. And he would go up on stage very drunk and would play an excellent show. And I look at that sort of thing from an auditor standpoint, and I go, and he was really trying to hold some stuff back in order to be, this is, and we can get into this. We talked about this a couple of podcasts ago in the one about the dopamine and drugs and things like that. But what happens is, when a person takes drugs, when a person takes alcohol, pot too, what they're doing is they're keying out their own reactive mind, at least temporarily. Yeah. So the things that are holding back their artistry, or so they think, are now keyed out and pushed out of the way for a short period of time. And they feel great.
Yep. Been there. Yeah.
And they can get on with the show. And what they're doing, keying out these masses in the reactive mind, is they're also keying out the valence that they're in most of the time to show that, they're to show their own muse, if people know what that term means, to let their own muse flourish.
Yeah.
And, Bonham would go up there and just kill it, on stage. Now, as a comparison, you and I being drummers, Neil Peart, for example.
Yeah.
Neil did not drink. Neil did not do anything before a show. And he would practice to practice.
This.
Okay. That's, this is a different type. It's a complete different type of professionalism. It's the difference between Homo sapiens and Homo nobis, where you can get somebody like that could play at that level, that intensity, that tempo for 2 to 3 hours and not miss a note, right? And be a musical machine like that. So, those are 2 varying degrees of the spectrum where they both would pull off amazing things as drummers. So, it isn't uncommon, but see, the thing is it all comes back to this valence. Neil was in valence. He was himself. Bonzo, not so much.
Yeah, there was John Bonham and there was Bonzo on stage. I don't know if it was that defined but we had the Bonzo performing John Bonham.
Yeah,
he showed up.
And then an interesting lineage here, because Neil Peart was very, very influenced by Keith Moon from The Who.
Yep.
Keith was certifiably insane.
Really?
Yes.
Didn't know that. I just knew that he didn't like using a hi-hat, and I thought that was insane. But
he's certified insane.
Oh.
And Keith and John Bonham were good buddies, and they all knew each other because they all came from the same neighborhood and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at that, and you look at whatever the valence is that Keith was going through. And Keith had significant drug and alcohol problems and was a real character. Still, you have that ability shine through that is the real being that is themselves,
right?
Through all of that. I mean, it's just mind blowing. What the human condition, the composite being, with a reactive mind and running through all these different valences. And Keith had many valences.
Mm-hmm.
If you read any of the guys from the Who's, their biographies and stuff like that, and the stories that they can tell, I mean, wow. So, musicians themselves tend to have a lot of valence problems because they're attacked by suppressive personalities. Creatives are always attacked by suppressive personalities. And this brings us into the neighborhood of where we were talking about the weaker valence.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody is around a suppressive, if they're around a suppressive long enough, they will snap in, and it's better to be the bad guy and survive than it is to be the weak guy and get crushed. And you saw this in Nazi Germany with the Third Reich as well. All these guys were in the same valence because that was the only way to survive.
Right.
And so agreement comes in with valences, and you get something like the Third Reich, because that otherwise you're not going to survive. I mean, they mean business. The Huns, same thing. The Romans were a little bit more forgiving in some ways, but just depended on who was in power and all of that stuff at the time. And there were more benevolent leaders in Rome sometimes than there were other times, depending on what was going on and the economics of the situation and all that stuff. So anyway, it's one of those things that, to the degree that a person is under suppression, is to the degree that they're likely going to be out of valence because it's the only way to survive. And this is something that we see, especially post-COVID.
Yeah.
We used to see personality tests come in at about the 60 to 70% that were a potential trouble source right off the street. Post-COVID, it's 93% are potential trouble sources because they're now running into a societal PTSness. I mean, we have a gentleman who was wanting to do services with us, who I will keep his anonymity, refused to get the jab. Refused to get the jab. And the journey that he had to go on to not get the jab and survive in the United States, what he was running into, took him over a year, and he ended up in another state, 3 states north of Florida, and is just now getting back in the fold with us because he refused to take the jab. I mean, this is a third dynamic suppression that's going on, where people are having a hard time to survive because they can't get a job unless they get the jab. Well, this is Orwellian out of valenceness, and people that hold their position and can stave off changing their body functionality for the rest of their lives. My hat's off to them. I mean, I've been able to do it. You've been able to do it, but in different places, in different states, it's not so much that way. And this is what you're dealing with suppression, is people go out of valence.
Yeah, the whole jab thing and all of that's very tracky too.
Yeah. So there's a lot to do with this, and these valences. What happens? What Hubbard found out is that this, if you can't beat them, join them thing. Well, this is what holds a person up on the whole track as well. So if you get this cleared up, the interesting thing to get cleared up, and this is an interesting twist in the whole thing, is that when you're dealing with valences and you're dealing with people who are changing their valences in order to survive and hold their position under suppression, because that's when it happens a lot, is it's due to suppression. When a person has no choice but to become their aggressor in order to hold their position, they can't go the adverse effect of them. Per Hubbard, and I've seen this and I've dismantled it with people, unless they've committed a harmful act towards the suppressor. So if they've committed what we call an overt act, something you wouldn't want done to you, but you did to them, all of a sudden you're bought, sold, and paid for by that suppressor. Now you're a potential trouble source. And that's where the whole thing shifts for valence. And that is what makes you go the adverse effect and eventually become and take the ride to you can't beat them, join them. And you become the person who's suppressing you.
Yeah. Could you go over that again? That something went over my head with that right there. And I think this is
okay.
Very valuable.
It's super, 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 super important.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna phrase it a different way and then we'll go back to the first way.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot become a potential trouble source to a person who is suppressing you. Let's say it's an abusive relationship. Okay. Well, I'm not even, obviously not that it's a familial, not that it's a marriage. You can have an abusive relationship with a kid down the street.
Or the boss.
Or the boss, or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't go the adverse effect. They can't harm you if you haven't done something to them that you wouldn't want done to you. This is the crux of the matter. No other thing than this datum. So how does this happen? Well, you can have a suppressive person who's like, well, I know you need the money and you're not going to get it from anybody else.
Listen,
I'll give it to you on these conditions. Okay. They'll set you up by doing that, lending you money, that sort of a thing, or they'll make the situation so that they have to lend you money. They'll set you up. Okay. Yeah. And you don't know it. And then you make some sort of tiny little transgression towards them that is against your own personal moral code. Well, guess what? Now you've gone down the chute. And it's a lot easier to do than one might think. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be beat up for being culpable for doing something to somebody that you wouldn't want done to you, because that's what you see in the church. In the church, they look at you when you're a potential trouble source, and they're like, you're just a piece of shit. You out ethics, you're PTS, you're just nothing but a problem. Fix yourself. Yeah. That's not Scientology. That's not independent Scientology specifically. Yeah, right. That sort of behavior is very much mob mentality. Yeah. It's not caring about the person in front of you. That's what Hubbard said. And, people do make mistakes, and potential trouble sources, people who have committed harmful acts against suppressive people, either presently or somebody in the past, and they're all caught up in that. And they're not totally all here. That's why they're a potential trouble source. You have to have some compassion for the person, and you have to be able to clean it up. And the best way to clean that up is, once you've found out who the person is that is suppressing them, either in the here and now, or a person in their past that was suppressing them, and they have somebody in the present that reminds them of that, or it's just that person in the past. If you have a rape victim or something like that, the person raped them in 1973, okay, that person was suppressing them in 1973. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
Okay. And it doesn't mean that they committed a harmful act against the person that raped them. That's not what I'm saying. Let me make that perfectly freaking clear. It does mean that there is somebody like that person that raped them in their past prior to that. Okay? Because that's the way the reactive mind works, is that Tom equals Bob, and Bob equals Steve, and Steve equals Sally, and Sally equals Sue. They're all one and the same.
Right. So in that particular instance, say a woman was raped, and you said 1973, and say the man that raped her was like her dad. And her dad, she might have committed against her dad back when she was...
That's right. That's right. That doesn't mean she's a potential trouble source to the guy that raped her, and that she did something to the guy that raped her. It does mean that she could have and probably did. I don't know anybody who has a father who hasn't done something to their father that they wouldn't want done to them. Now, if anybody listening to this podcast can say, well, I know somebody, I'm not buying that for a second.
Right.
Don't waste your time or mine with that, because that is just how this universe is set up. It is a rigged universe. You know, being on OT2, you know what I'm talking about. It is a rigged game, and it is not in our favor. Okay, with this sort of manifestation. So not everything is as it seems. And on the long scale, when somebody says, you know, well, I've been completely de-PTS'd and I am no longer PTS, you know, I will say that is great, and I am glad you're doing well. But in the back of my mind, I will always reserve the right to say, yes, but we're all still on planet Earth, and we are all still in the physical universe. You know, that's like that line at the end of Patton that he says that the Roman slave was saying to the Roman gladiator that had just won the battle, that it says, all glory is fleeting. Because, you know, it's all relative as to what you're not PTS to, which means what this has to do with valences, to come full circle, is that what we are aware of as to who we are and what we are is relative to the moment in time in the physical universe, which is a lie itself. Time and the physical universe is all relative to things that at that time seem to be hunky-dory or true. Right. Now, as your perception increases and you get more auditing, you start to realize that there are certain things that don't seem to quite make sense that did a few days ago. Okay. So your valence will improve. And this is what Hubbard found out about people, is that it is very much a relative thing, and you can get gains, but you have to be as much of yourself as you can be, and being as much as yourself as you can be is getting yourself cleaned up on these areas of people that you were an aggressor to. Right. And you did harmful acts to, because when you clean those up on all of the different flows, them to you, you to them, others to others, you to others, others to you, and you to yourself, most importantly, this whole thing comes crumbling down. So that's the important thing, is that once you get the areas of valence cleaned up, then now you're more yourself than you were 10 months ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And as you go up the grade chart in Scientology, you become more and more and more yourself, and you become more and more aware of the universe around you that is things that you cannot perceive with a body. And once you're able to perceive these things and you're aware of them, now you can do something about them and for them. This is what the OT levels are about. So this valence thing goes all the way from the bottom of the bridge: drugs, out ethics, harming yourself, dumbing yourself down so that you can forget things that you don't want to remember because of the suppression on your track from yourself and from others. all the way up to the top and truly finding out how much this valence thing is and how wide it is and what a gulf it is, to clearing that gulf out and finding that there is a beautiful canyon beneath that you didn't know exist that was once a sea. So that's what valences are about.
Yeah. And I can just really see myself how it's really important. Like, as you've talked about KRC before, knowledge, responsibility, and control. Once you do have this bit of knowledge and you start doing Dianetics and doing Scientology and making gains, you end up applying it from present time onward. So it's like, no, I don't want to get in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at things in this perspective now of knowing about valences and knowing about PTSdness and knowing about, committing overts against people, committing overts against myself. It makes you look at life differently after that. So going forward, there's more responsibility there. And then, right.
Yeah. And that's what responsibility and valences have to do with each other, is everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Because you would never take on somebody else's valence if you could front up to the responsibility of the whole situation. Now, you have to look at this and go, okay, so what's a 5-year-old child going to do to take responsibility? I get it.
Right.
I get it. Okay. And that's an unfortunate situation. Okay. For everybody at some point in time. But this is how this whole thing gets started. And if you've had X amount of millions of lives and things like that, and you've developed patterns and habits and all of this, well, you can see how it becomes a really twisted concatenation and things. But fortunately, with the tech that Hubbard has come up with, and some of it is just fabulously genius, you can unwind this whole thing very, very easily through education.
Right. Well,
and auditing, both, and get a person to understand this. And it doesn't take years. It doesn't take months. It just takes simple reading and clearing up definitions and everything, and taking an interest in yourself and going, I don't like the way I act. I don't like the way I do things. I do like these things about myself, but I always find myself stopping myself before I ever get to the things that I really want in life. Well, my friend, you are dealing with valences. So there we have it. That's a valence.
Yeah. So what, with responsibility, right? With increased responsibility comes increased havingness, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is that a person that has done contra survival acts to themselves or others, they find those contra survival acts a havingness, something it's like having, a string of pearls or a gold brick or a nice car. And when you audit somebody and you clean these things up, their havingness drops. This is how aberrated this whole thing has gotten, is that these contra survival acts, they become a havingness because they are a stable datum, a negative stable datum. This is something that they use to compare to something else. And whether it's negative or it's positive, it's better than no data at all. So they will use these things. And that's how you get on this really weird, twisted, aberrated trap. But if you get these things cleaned up, and you start getting them cleaned up, especially against terminals, other people, okay, all of this stuff comes apart really rapidly. And you'll see that the person's, it just expands. And you can replace that havingness of those harmful acts with good things, both subjective and objective. That's why we run havingness after we run overts and withholds on a person, because you feel a little inside, and it's not a pleasant feeling, but it doesn't take but a few moments to get the person's havingness back up. And then they start pulling in good things instead of pushing away good things.
Right.
Because of these valences.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you undo it. Overts and withholds.
Right. So a man low on havingness on the second dynamic, got to have responsibility taken there on the second dynamic so that havingness can increase and start attracting women in.
Right. Yeah, because if you're acting like a victim, the flow is switched up. That's the inflow. The thetan is designed by nature to outflow. A thetan is designed by nature, and this I'm saying the same thing here that I just said, just in a different way. The thetan is designed by nature to create.
Good.
They are not designed by nature to create bad things, bad effects. They are designed by nature to create good effects, both on themselves and on others.
Good.
And this is how far people have fallen, because they hold themselves back for the bad things that they've done as a solution to a problem when they know that they really should be causing good effects. What is the value? What is the good effect on smiling at a baby as you pass by?
Making that
That's a good. Yeah. Right. I mean, you acknowledge them. It's a form of communication. It's a form of positive communication. Doing a random act of kindness every day or a couple times a day for people. How does that make the person feel that you did the random act of kindness? Well, I'm sure it makes them feel good. How does it make you feel? It makes you feel 10 feet tall because you did something that you wanted to do for no other reason than wanting to do it. Not because you were going to get into heaven, not because it was something you were supposed to do. That's a valence. But doing it because you want to do good things. That's what a being, a thetan, a spirit is here for, is to cause good effects and create change in the physical universe and theta universe.
And for our friends in the church whom are on the fence maybe about coming into the independent field, also too, it's not done for stats.
No, it's not done for stats. I mean, that's the same thing as doing it because you want to get in heaven.
Right. Exactly.
It's the same damn thing. And they need to take a look at that. And that doesn't make them wrong. Yep. It just makes them, if anything, it might make you feel a little silly. But the thing is, get over it. It's not a big deal. You're forgiven. You have to be able to forgive yourself. That's super important. You have to be able to forgive yourself. And that is granting yourself beingness, that you will make mistakes. And that's how we learn in this universe. It's a hard universe, and that's the way this universe works. But you don't learn by the positives. You learn by the mistakes. And the only way you can do that is to go out and make a mistake and then go, oop, I shouldn't have made a left turn there at Pine Street.
Yeah,
that type of thing. Yeah, right. Yeah, you're going to have to bang your head against the wall in order to know that you can't bang your head against the wall.
Right. Yeah, they go in and become interbulated by mest and then de-interbulate itself.
Yeah, and that's the whole insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. Mm-hmm. That's what a valence is.
Right.
Yeah. Over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And there's billions and billions and billions of people doing that at this very moment as we have this conversation. This is how across the boards and how exact this thing is. All cases are the same, and they can be handled the same way. And all it takes is some responsibility and a little confront on their part. That's what we're here to do, is to help direct their attention towards that. That's what auditors do. Right. So, folks, I hope you learned everything pretty well. You got a better understanding of it. I hope we didn't go over anybody's head. I really enjoyed this podcast a lot. It's a fun conversation to have, and it goes all over the place when you start talking about it. So any closing arguments or comments?
Oh, no, this is great. I think maybe perhaps we'd be interested in doing our next podcast on havingness. We do have, we brought up havingness there at the end and responsibility. I think that's a great place to go after this one.
Yeah, we do have. We'll do that on probably Sunday for the Monday podcast. Well, sounds good. So for myself, Jonathan Burke, and for Jason Robba,
thank you all for listening and tuning in for season 5 here. I'm glad we're able to put out so many podcasts for you guys.
Me too. And everybody take care of yourself, and we'll see you on next Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.